The carriage rattled down the lane, its wheels kicking up dust. Inside, the Thompson family held their breath in unison as the old house came into view. It stood on a hill, silhouetted against the setting sun, a majestic structure with a somber charm.
Here we are, Mary, our new home.
John the father smiled at his wife Mary, their eyes reflecting shared excitement. 10-year-old twins Lily and Lucas pressed their faces against the window, their expressions a mixture of awe and apprehension.
Wow, it's huge!
The house, with its ivy-covered walls and a forlorn grace, seemed to hold a century of stories, whispered secrets waiting to be discovered. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten time as they stepped inside.
Let's get some air in here.
John threw open the windows, and sunlight streamed into the grand hallway, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The house creaked around them, a symphony of settling wood and sighing drafts, a sound both eerie and comforting.
It's beautiful, John. I can already feel it becoming our home.
As the family explored their new home, each footstep echoed with anticipation, their laughter chasing away the lingering silence. The old house on Hawthorne Lane, despite its air of melancholy, was slowly coming alive with the promise of a new beginning. The first few days were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. John, ever the optimist, saw potential in every creaky floorboard and faded wallpaper. Mary, with her gentle touch, breathed warmth back into the cold fireplaces and dusty furniture. The twins, their initial apprehension replaced by childlike wonder, turned the sprawling garden into their own secret world. By day, the house was filled with the joyful chaos of a family making a home.
This place is amazing!
But when night fell, a different atmosphere descended upon the old house. Shadows stretched and deepened, turning familiar corners into lurking figures. The silence, once comforting, became punctuated by whispers and creaks, the house seeming to sigh and mutter in its sleep.
What was that?
One night, Mary woke to an unfamiliar sound, a soft, mournful cry that seemed to emanate from the depths of the house. It was a child's cry, filled with a sorrow that chilled her to the bone. The cry became a nightly occurrence, a haunting melody that seemed to seep from the very walls. At first, John dismissed it as the wind whistling through the old eaves, but Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, a presence, unseen and unheard, yet undeniably felt. One evening, armed with a kerosene lamp, Mary ventured into the attic, the source of the unsettling sound.
I have to know what's up there.
The attic was a cavernous space, dimly lit by a single dusty window. Cobwebs hung like ghostly curtains, and the air was thick with the smell of decay and forgotten things. As Mary took a tentative step inside, the floorboards groaned beneath her feet, and the cry echoed around her, closer now, more insistent. She noticed a small wooden door tucked away in a dark corner, almost invisible beneath years of dust and grime. The cry seemed to be coming from behind it.
What's behind this door?
Fear gave way to a wave of pity and dread as Mary knelt before the door. With trembling hands, she fumbled with the rusted latch, the old metal groaning in protest. The door creaked open, revealing a tiny, cramped room, barely big enough to stand in. A single broken window cast a sliver of moonlight onto the dusty floor.
Oh my.
And there, in the center of the room, lay a child's rocking horse, its paint chipped and faded, its once bright colors now muted with age. As Mary reached out to touch it, a cold breeze swept through the room, and she recoiled, a gasp escaping her lips. The rocking horse began to move, slowly at first, then faster and faster as if propelled by an unseen hand. The air grew heavy and the temperature plummeted. A child's laughter, tinged with a heartbreaking sadness, echoed in the silence. Mary stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest.
I'm not alone.
She knew then, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that she was not alone in the attic.
Mary fled the attic, her mind racing, her heart heavy with a nameless dread. She found John and the twins gathered in the parlor, their faces etched with concern.
As she recounted her experience, the flickering lamplight cast long shadows on the walls, their shapes shifting and dancing in a macabre ballet.
John listened intently, his face etched with concern, as Mary recounted the eerie events in the attic.
John, ever the pragmatist, initially dismissed her story as an overactive imagination, but the look in Mary's eyes, the sheer terror and sorrow reflected there, gave him pause. He knew his wife, knew her strength and her level-headedness. Something had shaken her to her core.
That night, as the family huddled together in the parlor, the cry echoing through the house, John made a silent promise. He would uncover the truth behind the attic's tragic secret. He would bring peace to the restless spirit that haunted their home.
The next day, John began his investigation. He scoured the dusty attic, searching for clues, for any remnants of the past that would shed light on the tragedy that had unfolded within their home's walls. He found a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard, its pages brittle with age. The faded ink revealed a heartbreaking story, a tale of love, loss, and unimaginable cruelty. The journal belonged to a young woman named Amelia, the previous owner of the house. Amelia had a young son, a boy named Thomas, who loved music and laughter. But Thomas was a sickly child, confined to his room for much of his short life. One day, Thomas vanished. Amelia searched for him tirelessly, her heart breaking with each passing day. But Thomas was never found. The journal ended abruptly, the last few pages blank, filled only with the raw, agonizing grief of a mother who had lost her child. John closed the journal, his heart heavy with sadness. He knew then that the mournful cry echoing through the house was the cry of young Thomas, his spirit trapped, longing for peace. John shared his discovery with Mary and the twins. Lily, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, suggested they try to communicate with Thomas. Lucas, always practical, suggested they leave the house immediately. But Mary, her heart filled with compassion for the lost soul, knew they couldn't abandon Thomas. They had to help him find peace.
John remembered reading in Amelia's journal that Thomas had loved music. Perhaps, he thought, music could be the key to reaching him, to soothing his tormented soul.
He retrieved his old violin from the attic, its strings coated in dust. As he drew the bow across the strings, a mournful sound filled the air, a sound that seemed to resonate with the sadness that permeated the house. That night, the family gathered in the parlor. John played his violin, the mournful melody filling the silence of the old house. Mary sang softly, her voice filled with a mother's tenderness. Lily and Lucas listened, their young faces etched with a mixture of fear and wonder. As the last note faded, the cry echoed through the house, closer now, filled with a longing that tugged at their hearts. Suddenly, the room grew cold, the air shimmered, and a faint ethereal glow emanated from the rocking horse in the corner. The rocking horse began to move, slowly at first, then faster and faster, as if a child were riding it. A small, translucent figure began to take shape, hovering above the rocking horse. It was the ghostly form of a young boy, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes filled with a longing that mirrored the cry that echoed through the house. The family watched in stunned silence as the ghostly figure of young Thomas materialized before them. Fear gave way to compassion as they realized the depth of the child's sorrow, the pain of being trapped, unseen and unheard for so long.
Thomas, we hear you. We know you're here. We want to help you find peace.
As she spoke, the temperature in the room seemed to rise. The air shimmered and the ghostly figure of Thomas grew more distinct. He turned his sorrowful eyes towards Mary, and a look of peace settled upon his face. The cry that had haunted the house for so long ceased. The rocking horse slowed to a gentle stop. The ghostly figure of Thomas began to fade, the ethereal glow dimming until only a faint shimmer remained. As he disappeared, a sense of peace settled over the house, a feeling of stillness that had been absent for far too long. The family stood in silence, their hearts filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. They had borne witness to a tragedy, had felt the pain of a lost soul, but they had also experienced the power of compassion, the healing balm of human connection that transcended even death itself. As they turned to leave the parlor, the faint strains of John's violin seemed to linger in the air, a mournful yet hopeful melody that spoke of love, loss, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The old house on Hawthorne Lane was never quite the same. The shadows seemed less menacing, the silence less oppressive. The family continued to live there, their lives forever touched by the experience. They never forgot Thomas, the young boy who had haunted their home. They kept his memory alive, not with fear, but with compassion. They shared his story with others, a reminder that even in darkness, there is always hope, that even in death, there is always the possibility of peace. The cry from the attic had been a cry for help, a plea for recognition and release. And in answering that cry, the Thompson family discovered that sometimes the most unexpected journey can lead to the most profound acts of compassion, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has an unyielding capacity for love, empathy, and ultimately, salvation.